Before installation, you have to make sure that you have all the correct parts from the parts list. You should have 2 lower ball joints, 2 upper ball joints, a hardware kit, and an adjuster wrench included in the kit. Park the vehicle on a flat, level surface or safely raise the vehicle on a lift. Chock the rear wheels, make sure the vehicle is in park or in gear, and set the parking brake. Raise the front end, place the front axle housing on jack stands, and remove the front wheels. Unhook the ABS sensor lines from the flexible brake lines. Remove the brake calipers from the knuckles. And hang them from the frame with caliper hangers or straps of some sort. Remove the brake rotors. Loosen the ABS sensors by unscrewing the 5mm Allen head bolt and then pulling the sensor carefully up and out. It will not be possible to pull the sensors through the brake backing plates until the unit bearings are removed. The ball joints may be installed without removing the drag link or tie rod. If you would like to remove the drag link and tie rod, do so now. Remove the wheel bearing bolts from the back side of the steering knuckle with a 13mm 12-point socket. It can be helpful to rotate the axle shafts to orient the U-joint so that you have access to the bolt heads. Remove the wheel bearing unit assembly and the axle shaft as one piece. Carefully knock the assembly loose from the knuckle with a soft mallet. Carefully pull the axle shaft out through the knuckle. Be careful not to damage the brake backing plates. Remove cotter pins from the old ball joints. Loosen the nuts on the lower ball joints. Remove the nuts and ABS line clamps from the upper ball joints. Knock the knuckles loose by either striking the knuckle with a ball peen hammer in the area of the ball joint stud taper or using an air hammer. Separate the lower ball joint taper first, then the upper. Remove the dust boots from all the ball joints and wipe up all the old grease. Press out the upper ball joints first, up and out of the housing. Press the lowers down and out of the housing. Inspect knuckle tapers and inner C-bores. Ensure they are not deformed and are clean and free of burrs. Damaged parts should be replaced or repaired as necessary. We will press in the new lower ball joints first. We recommend disassembling the ball joints and pressing in the body only. This makes installation easier. The joints may be pressed into the housing assembled, but it is important that the press adapters do not rest on the locking tabs on the outside of the cap. If the press adapters are too large, they may damage the locking tabs machined into the cap. Most ball joint presses should have an adapter that fits the lower ball joint correctly. Depending on the wheel offset, axle trusses, gussets, axle shaft size, and other factors, the position of the Zerk will need to be sighted by the installer. We recommend positioning the Zerk fitting so that it is pointing towards the rear of the vehicle, slightly towards center. Once the lower ball joints are correctly positioned, press the joints into the axle housing. It is critical that the body is pressed in evenly and smoothly. The joint must sit flat and flush against the lower surface of the inner C. Press the upper ball joints into the axle housing. We recommend leaving the dust boot on the upper ball joint. It can be difficult to install on the joint after the joint has been pressed into the housing. It is critical that the body is pressed in evenly and smoothly. If the lower ball joints were disassembled for installation, reassemble the joints following the lower ball joint overview. Ensure the roll pin is engaged in the bearing properly. The threaded cap should be hand tight for now. If the threaded cap does not appear to thread on far enough, it is likely that the roll pin is not properly engaged with the machine slot in the bearing. If the threaded cap will not thread in by hand, it is possible that the ball joint is too tight of a press fit in the C. Install the Zerk fittings and dust boots onto the lower ball joints. We recommend using flush-style Zerk fittings in the lower ball joints to eliminate clearance issues with aftermarket axle shafts. And install the Zerk fittings onto the uppers. We recommend aligning the cotter pin holes so that they are perpendicular to the axle, aligned front to back on the vehicle. If the cotter pin holes need to be relocated, spin the ball studs with a pin through the cotter pin hole. Install the steering knuckles. Tighten the lower ball joint castle nut slightly, no more than 30 foot-pounds. Reinstall the ABS line clips under the upper ball joint nut if so equipped. Torque the upper ball joint castle nuts to 70 foot-pounds with a 7/8 or 22 mm socket. Torque the lower ball joint castle nuts to 70 foot-pounds with a 1 1/16 or 27 mm socket. Rotate the knuckles from lock to lock by hand. They should be stiff but able to rotate by hand. Install the cotter pins. If the castle nut slots do not line up with the cotter pin holes, continue to tighten the castle nuts until they align. Set preload on the lower ball joints. With the tabs bent out of the way, slowly turn the cap clockwise using the provided adjuster tool and quarter drive torque wrench. Tighten the joints until 10 foot-pounds is shown on the torque wrench. Our adjustment torque spec is the torque at the wrench, not at the joint. It is important that the torque wrench is oriented perpendicular to the joint. With the joints preloaded, bend down 2 of the tabs from the lock ring into the cap. Be sure the tabs bent down will be accessible when the vehicle is reassembled and back on the ground. Reinstall the unit bearing, hub, and axle shaft assembly. It is important to be careful when installing the axle shafts to ensure the splines line up in the differential and not to damage the inner axle seals. Carefully thread the ABS sensors through the brake backing plates. We recommend cleaning all the hub bolts with brake cleaner and a wire brush, and then using high-strength thread locker on installation. Torque the unit bearing hub bolts to 75 foot-pounds. Reinstall the ABS sensors with a 5 mm Allen and torque to 40 foot-pounds. Reinstall the tie rod and drag link if they were removed. Reinstall the brake rotors and calipers. We recommend cleaning all the brake caliper bolts with brake cleaner and a wire brush, and then using high-strength thread locker on installation. Tighten the caliper mounting bolts to 120 foot-pounds. The joints come pre-greased. If you are going to grease them after installation, use no more than 1 pump of grease. We recommend Synergy branded lithium grease. If this is not available, be sure to use an extreme pressure grease designed for metal on metal bearings and joints. Reinstall the wheels and tires. Torque them to 95 foot-pounds. Congratulations! Your installation of the adjustable Synergy ball joints are complete.